right. This short passage, I'm not sure this name, so I'm going to let the reader pronounce that. The Goat, and it is a folk tale, which is a traditional story handed down through generations of a particular culture. Literary elements, A simile is a comparison of two things that are alike, using words such as like and as to make the comparison. For example, as cold as ice is a simile. A metaphor is a direct comparison of two things without any connecting words. For example, the wind is an imp. So when you say one thing is something else, it's a metaphor. When you say it's like something else, it's a simile. All right, follow along.
Zlateh the Goat by Isaac Bashevis Singer. Illustrated by Maurice Sendak. At Hanukkah time, the road from the village to the town is usually covered with snow, but this year the winter had been a mild one. Hanukkah had almost come, yet little snow had fallen. The sun shone most of the time. The peasants complained that because of the dry weather, there would be a poor harvest of winter grain. New grass sprouted, and the peasants sent their cattle to pasture.
Okay, continuing on page 635. Follow along.
For Reuben the furrier, it was a bad year, and after a long hesitation, he decided to sell Zlateh the goat. She was old and gave little milk. Fievel, the town butcher, had offered 8 gulden for her. Such a sum would buy Hanukkah candles, potatoes and oil for pancakes, gifts for the children, and other holiday necessaries for the house. Reuben told his oldest boy Aaron to take the goat to town. Aaron understood what taking the goat to Fievel meant, but he had to obey his father. Leah, his mother, wiped the tears from her eyes when she heard the news. Aaron's younger sisters, Anna and Miriam, cried loudly. Aaron put on his quilted jacket and a cap with earmuffs, bound a rope around Zlateh's neck, and took along 2 slices of bread with cheese to eat on the road. Aaron was supposed to deliver the goat by evening, spend the night at the butcher's, and return the next day with the money. While the family said goodbye to the goat, and Aaron placed the rope around her neck, Zlateh stood as patiently and good-naturedly as ever. She licked Reuben's hand. She shook her small white beard. Zlateh trusted human beings. She knew that they always fed her and never did her any harm. When Aaron brought her out on the road to town, she seemed somewhat astonished. She'd never been led in that direction before. She looked back at him questioningly, as if to say, "Where are you taking me?" But after a while, she seemed to come to the conclusion that a goat shouldn't ask questions. Still, the road was different. They passed new fields, pastures, and huts with thatched roofs. Here and there, a dog barked and came running after them, but Aaron chased it away with his stick. The sun was shining when Aaron left the village. Suddenly, the weather changed. A large black cloud with a bluish center appeared in the east and spread itself rapidly over the sky. A cold wind blew in with it. The crows flew.
Continuing on page 636, follow along.
Low, croaking. At first, it looked as if it would rain, but instead it began to hail as in summer. It was early in the day, but it became dark as dusk. After a while, the hail turned to snow. In his 12 years, Aaron had seen all kinds of weather, but he had never experienced a snow like this one. It was so dense, it shut out the light of the day. In a short time, their path was completely covered. The wind became as cold as ice. The road to town was narrow and winding. Aaron no longer knew where he was. He could not see through the snow. The cold soon penetrated his quilted jacket. At first, Zlateh didn't seem to mind the change in weather. She too was 12 years old and knew what winter meant. But when her legs sank deeper and deeper into the snow, she began to turn her head and look at Aaron in wonderment. Her mild eyes seemed to ask, "Why are we out in such a storm?" Aaron hoped that a peasant would come along in his cart, but no one passed by. The snow grew thicker, falling to the ground in large, whirling flakes. Beneath it, Aaron's boots touched the softness of a plowed field. He realized that he was no longer on the road. He had gone astray. He could no longer figure out which was east or west, which way was the village, the town. The wind whistled, howled, whirled the snow about in eddies. It looked as if white imps were playing tag on the fields. A white dust rose above.
Continuing, page 637. Follow along.
The ground. Zlateh stopped. She could walk no longer. Stubbornly, she anchored her cleft hooves in the earth and bleated as if pleading to be taken home. Icicles hung from her white beard, and her horns were glazed with frost. Aaron did not want to admit the danger, but he knew just the same that if they did not find shelter, they would freeze to death. This was no ordinary storm. It was a mighty blizzard. The snowfall had reached his knees. His hands were numb, and he could no longer feel his toes. He choked when he breathed. His nose felt like wood, and he rubbed it with snow. Zlateh's bleating began to sound like crying. Those humans in whom she had so much confidence had dragged her into a trap. Aaron began to pray to God for himself and for the innocent animal. Suddenly, he made out the shape of a hill. He wondered what it could be. Who had piled snow into such a huge heap? He moved toward it, dragging Zlateh along after him. When he came near it, he realized that it was a large haystack which the snow had blanketed. Aaron realized immediately that they were saved. With great effort, he dug his way through the snow. He was a village boy and knew what to do. When he reached the hay, he hollowed out a nest for himself and the goat. No matter how cold it may be outside, in the hay it is always warm. And hay was food for Zlateh. The moment she smelled it, she became contented and began to eat. Outside, the snow continued to fall. It quickly covered the passageway Aaron had dug. But a boy and an animal need to breathe, and there was hardly any air in their hideout. Aaron bored a kind of window through the hay and snow, and carefully kept the passage clear. Zlateh, having eaten her fill, sat down on her hind legs and seemed to have regained her confidence in man. Aaron ate his slices of bread and cheese, but after the difficult journey, he was still hungry. He looked at Zlateh and noticed her udders were full. He lay down next to
Continuing on page 638, follow along.
her, placing himself so that when he milked her, he could squirt the milk into his mouth. It was rich and sweet. Zlateh was not accustomed to being milked that way, but she did not resist. On the contrary, she seemed eager to reward Aaron for bringing her to a shelter whose very walls, floor, and ceiling were made of food. Through the window, Aaron could catch a glimpse of the chaos outside. The wind carried before it whole drifts of snow. It was completely dark, and he did not know whether night had already come or whether it was the darkness of the storm. Thank God that in the hay it was not cold. The dried hay, grass, and field flowers exuded the warmth of the summer sun. Zlateh ate frequently. She nibbled from above, below, from the left and right. Her body gave forth an animal warmth, and Aaron cuddled up to her. He had always loved Zlateh. But now she was like a sister. He was alone, cut off from his family, and wanted to talk. He began to talk to Zlateh. Zlateh, what do you think about what has happened to us? He asked. Ma, Zlateh answered. If we hadn't found this stack of hay, we would both be frozen stiff by now, Aaron said. Ma, was the goat's reply. If the snow keeps on falling like this, we may have to stay here for days, Aaron explained. Ma, Zlateh bleated. What does ma mean? Aaron asked. You'd better speak up clearly. Ma, Zlateh tried. Well, let it be ma, then, Aaron said patiently. You can't speak, but I know you understand. I need you, and you need me. Isn't that right? Ma. Aaron became sleepy. He made a pillow out of some hay, leaned his head on it, and dozed off. Zlateh, too, fell asleep.
Continuing, page 639. Follow along.
When Aaron opened his eyes, he didn't know whether it was morning or night. The snow had blocked up his window. He tried to clear it, but when he had bored through it to the length of his arm, he still hadn't reached the outside. Luckily, he had his stick with him and was able to break through to the open air. It was still dark outside. The snow continued to fall, and the wind wailed, first with one voice and then with many. Sometimes it had the sound of devilish laughter. Zlateh, too, awoke, and when Aaron greeted her, she answered, Ma. Yes, Zlateh's language consisted of only one word, but it meant many things. Now she was saying, we must accept all that God gives us: heat, cold, hunger, satisfaction, light, and darkness. Aaron had awakened hungry. He had eaten up his food, but Zlateh had plenty of milk. For 3 days, Aaron and Zlateh stayed in the haystack. Aaron had always loved Zlateh, but in these 3 days, he loved her more and more. She fed him with her milk and helped him keep warm. She comforted him with her patience. He told her many stories, and she always cocked her ears and listened. When he patted her, she licked his hands and his face. Then she said, Ma, and he knew it meant, I love you too. The snow fell for 3 days, though after the first day, it was not as thick, and the wind quieted down. Sometimes Aaron felt that there could never have been a summer, that the snow had always fallen, ever since he could remember. He, Aaron, never had a father or mother or...
Continuing on page 640. Follow along.
or sisters. He was a snow child, born of the snow, and so was Zlateh. It was so quiet in the hay that his ears rang in the stillness. Aaron and Zlateh slept all night and a good part of the day. As for Aaron's dreams, they were all about warm weather. He dreamed of green fields, trees covered with blossoms, clear brooks, and singing birds. By the third night, the snow had stopped, but Aaron did not dare to find his way home in the darkness. The sky became clear, and the moon shone, casting silvery nets on the snow. Aaron dug his way out and looked at the world. It was all white, quiet, dreaming dreams of heavenly splendor. The stars were large and close. The moon swam in the sky as in a sea. On the morning of the fourth day, Aaron heard the ringing of sleigh bells. The haystack was not far from the road. The peasant who drove the sleigh pointed out the way to him, not to the town and Fievel the butcher, but home to the village. Aaron had decided in the haystack that he would never part with Zlateh. Aaron's family and their neighbors had searched for the boy and the goat, but had found no trace of them during the storm. They feared they were lost. Aaron's mother and sisters cried for him. His father remained silent and gloomy. Suddenly, one of the neighbors came running to their house with the news that Aaron and Zlateh were coming up the road.
Okay, continuing on page 641. Follow along.
There was great joy in the family. Aaron told them how he had found the stack of hay and how Zlateh had fed him with her milk. Aaron's sisters kissed and hugged Zlateh and gave her a special treat of chopped carrots and potato peels, which Zlateh gobbled up hungrily. Nobody ever again thought of selling Zlateh, and now that the cold weather had finally set in, the villagers needed the services of Reuven the furrier once more. When Hanukkah came, Aaron's mother was able to fry pancakes every evening, and Zlateh got her portion too. Even though Zlateh had her own pen, she often came to the kitchen, knocking on the door with her horns to indicate that she was ready for a visit, and she was always admitted. In the evening, Aaron, Miriam, and Anne played dreidel. Zlateh sat near the stove watching the children and the flickering of the Hanukkah candles. Once in a while, Aaron would ask her, "Zlateh, do you remember the 3 days we spent together?" And Zlateh would scratch her neck with a horn, shake her white bearded head, and come out with a single sound which expressed all her thoughts and all her love.
All right, thanks for following along, and I'll see you on the next one.